Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 31 of Digital Section, a nerd podcast. And now, if you're like me, sometimes you just get thrown out of the loop. You don't know what's going on, especially with this whole tech thing. Because, technology just runs everything in our modern lives. Well, we've got just the guest for you. And his name is Seamus Byrne. He comes to us from down under and is the head of the digital tech site Mr. Byteside. That is BYTE for those of you who are in the tech know. And if you're not, now you know.
And we want to thank Seamus for his time as we continue our coverage of Ready Player One. This is officially week 2 of the celebration. So before we actually get the predictions of the future from Seamus himself, we'd like to talk about our social media, as we always like to do. If you got here by accident, you can find us by searching for Digital Dissection, a nerd podcast, wherever you listen to your favorite shows. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we like to keep the conversation going on our blog. We like to share some deep thoughts, some of the personal off-the-cuff things there. But hey, if you like reading, we write stuff. So pay us a visit, check out the extra content, and stay a while. We're going to share some more stuff during the week. Without further ado, let's get Seamus on the line. Well, folks, welcome back. Today, we are joined by award-winning journalist and broadcaster who for many years has covered the future of technology, video games, and digital culture. He's known for being the founding editor of the Australian edition of Gizmodo, later becoming an editor for CNET, and working for Managed Science Alert, as well as Innovation Australia. Now, he also operates Byteside, covering the business and culture of technology, internet, games, esports, and more. He's also apparently the deadliest man on earth with a yo-yo. We welcome Seamus Byrne. How are you doing, Seamus?
Really good. That list of jobs does sound like I've changed jobs way too often over the past 2 decades. But, that's it. There's a long timeline there. I can't remember where you spotted the yo-yo thing, but that is also definitely a thing. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I'm very interested to see hear about your freelance work, and if that was your only source of income for a while was just freelance work, and if an editor ever offered you a nice box of Christmas meat instead of an actual job.
No, I've managed to keep my editors on the side of cash money in my bank account rather than just pure barter trade. Yeah.
We've moved on from leaving a box of fruits and vegetables to pay people on their stoop. But either way, it's great to have you. As part of the introduction on this show, we do like to give a little bit of background to our listeners about entry points for folks in their fields, or sometimes even going as far back as their hometowns and learning a bit more about that origin story. So whether you'd like to kind of give us the quick origin story from that standpoint, or your relationship with technology, I think either one's going to be interesting to hear.
Yeah, cool. So look, I was a big nerd in the 80s and 90s was my main little growing up phase before I started finding work things in my life. And I never got to have my own Atari 2600 or Nintendo. So there was definitely, I think, that, the unattainable thing about it. It meant I was ever more intrigued by my friends and going over to their houses and playing with the consoles and doing, all-nighter sleepovers where we would just sit there and play barnstorming all night on an Atari 2600 or Berserk. Good times. But in the 90s then, I did get one computer in the 80s, and that was my TRS 80 Color Computer 2 from Radio Shack. And it was like the poor man's Commodore 64, and I know I've been hassled by TRS-80 fans for saying that in the past, so I apologize. It comes from a place of love. But once I kind of started to get into the uni phase, that's when I think everything changed for me, where I'd always loved dabbling, and I tried to write my own code on the computer I had, tried to write things where I could play Dungeons and Dragons by like typing up kind of character generators and stuff in my computer.
Cool.
But I hit uni in 94, January 94, because we're like a calendar year down here in Australia. And that was when I got the internet for the first time. And so I was doing computer science, and I got into the computer lab, and we like, here's your login credentials. And we'd never had it at home at that point. And the first integrated web browser, Xmosaic on Unix, had just come out in like November 93. So it was kind of just a few months after that first unified web browser had arrived. And I really do remember getting into this lab, going, okay, how does this whole lab thing work? What do you mean we've got networked computers? And then, there's this internet thing, and I can start searching for just anything. And that mixture of going on to news groups, of course, that was kind of the main thing at the time before you could literally surf to the end of the web at the time. You'd be like, well, I've read all the pages. Okay, what do we do now? Yahoo was an actual list of websites that was manually put together. But I knew, I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to do something to do with this new internet thing. I remember there being debates amongst other people around me of like, this is like, it's just going to be a small thing. And I was just like, no, this is going to be everything. So over the course of my uni time, I actually dropped out of computer science because they made us play with circuit boards and stuff. And I was just like, this isn't really what I care about. Like, I want to do the code, not the building. And yeah, I just really started to learn how to build web pages and things. Also did like video production and stuff like that. And I think through that kind of journey, I realized, I was learning a lot of the actual skills for making stuff and across, all sorts of AV and website building. But then the degree I ended up finishing in was kind of a media and communications degree. So like a journalism style degree, but it was very practical still. So I still thought I'd build web pages and stuff. And then, cut to 2001, and I was living in London. I'd moved to London. I thought I'd get a job as a web developer, and a recruiter actually sent me for a job as a journalist because they went, hey, like, have you thought about doing this? And I got my first break as a technology journalist. And that's kind of what I realized. I'm like, I love doing it, and I love knowing it inside out and the nerding out on it. But I realized I'm really good at helping explain this stuff to other people and why they should care about it and why it matters. And so, it really has now been, I guess, 20 years to the year of doing that version where I'm like, I love it and I love making stuff, but I also really love trying to help other people understand why they should care about it and what that, what's the next tick, what comes after the current thing, especially when back then people used to kind of shrug their shoulders a bit and go, is this really going to stick around? I think there's a little bit less of that. Now it's more like they're going, well, I've got a smartphone, so what? And you're like, well, did you not notice it changed everything over the last 10 years?
Yeah, and that's why I love Byteside, because just kind of go down that path for a moment here, because Byteside does a combination of explaining all of these different aspects of whether it's culture, whether it's technology, and really kind of balancing all of it well. And so I was interested to dig into Byteside a little bit, if you could explain how that formed and how that project got off the ground.
Yeah. So look, I appreciate you saying that. I think the original idea for Byteside for me was always, I just want an outlet that wants to talk about it in the same way I want to hear about it. And obviously the way I like to talk about it. But the big thing was real, I feel like, and I've loved working at CNET, and I loved all the, the Gears and Kotaku and all those sites that I've worked for in the past. But I think, and I will actually think Gizmodo and Kotaku and Lifehacker always, I really love the idea that the writer's voice is very clear, that the writer is able to express how much they love the thing that they're talking about, or if they're annoyed, that you will read it, you can tell what they're feeling about a subject. But I've also always loved, through especially my freelance era. So I did spend like 7 years as a full-time freelancer. Yeah, and like you're saying earlier, there were phases when I had to explain to my parents, no, I'm not freelance as in I earn no money. I literally do make a full-time living writing for
Yeah.
other people.
Mhm.
But what I loved was in any given story, I just like it could be an enterprise technology story, right? I remember doing a story once about, call center technology. And totally it's like, this is a high-end enterprise business kind of a tech. But I saw this keynote where the head of the company was kind of telling off all the people in the room for the fact that they were using the software wrong, and that if they were using it better, then they could demographically match somebody ringing up the call center with the person in the call center, right? So,
Mhm.
if whether you're like a 70-year-old dude or you're like a 25-year-old woman, well, you've got all kinds of people in your call center, and we can try to match that so that the person will understand their perspective on life when they're then trying to, it might be they've got a complaint, but if the person listening to the complaint kind of understands you, then you feel a lot better about it. And I remember just sitting there and going, this is like a story anybody would find interesting, not just the newspaper that has asked me to write about this for businesses. And so I've always tried to kind of, I think Byteside has helped me try to combine that, where I'm like, why not write about whatever is interesting? And that might be the business side of a piece of tech, or it might be a game, it might be esports. But with everything, just that clarity in the way you're writing about it, that means, again, my voice is clear. And especially in the business stuff, I think, there's a lot of that kind of writing where I try to make it as just interesting and engaging as possible for whoever's reading it. I mean, Byteside first started 10 years ago. We tried to do it as like a pub video, like a live show in pubs, where we would get a panel of guests and we would actually have a chat and shoot it on video. It was before we could live stream. It was kind of hilarious to think back and go, we were just a little bit too early, because even YouTube, we couldn't put up videos longer than 5 minutes in 2010, because that's what YouTube was at the time. It was short clips. And so we kind of had to pay for our own like video hosting to put it on our website. And then that got expensive. And it was just, really, just that distribution wasn't there yet for that kind of thing, let alone going live online, right? Like we just couldn't do it. And now kicking off the new version of Byteside, we've got a pandemic to deal with, so we can't go and do pub shows or anything like that. But it's just trying to be its own thing where let's cover everything, let's enjoy chatting about it. And what's nice is I did a survey recently, as trying to put the pitch together to get more, sponsors and advertisers involved. And I've, talking to friends in the industry, they're like, why would a business want to kind of advertise on your site? And I've realized through the process of surveying that I'm like, because nerds like talking about all this stuff. Even if they work at a really big company, they still enjoy reading about it in the context of, nerding out. So we can talk about everything. And that person also happens to, buy software for their 1,000-person company as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's totally true, because I used to work in engineering staff for just about 5 years, and I ran across that too, where you would have folks that are sometimes they're more excited to actually work on the technology than they are to even worry about how much they're getting paid for that job, right? There are people geeking out about, unfortunately, actually designing the chips and the SCs. I apologize for you getting out of that. but I some of the most impassioned folks I've seen in the industry were the low level embedded coders, programmers, however you want to look at it. The people who are building like the life guts and the startup systems for these products. So I totally believe in that from what you just said. I mean, it's something I've seen time and time again, and that's why I think Byteside is such a great resource, because you mentioned it. I'm already feeling it. Like I can find on this site that I find interest in immediately, whether it's a movie runtime, it's a technology reference. I mean, there's all kinds of different things you can find on this website, guys. So definitely give Byteside a try here, we'll put it in the notes. You'll be able to find it.
Cheers.
We're not going to hide it from
Yeah.
I was going to actually, shout out to The Register is one of my other favorite websites for this, because they're like all about, hardcore engineering and business technology, but like they love putting a pun in every single headline if they can, and I just love that it's clearly a bunch of nerds who really know what they're talking about, but they're nerds. They're fundamentally nerds, and they want to show that off by cracking jokes every chance they get.
Yep, they always intend the pun, and I can do nothing but respect people who do that.
Well, that's awesome, and Seamus, we appreciate you taking us through that journey with you. One thing about this week, what we're actually doing, if we've maybe kept it too much of a secret, this week's going to be dedicated to continuing our conversation about Ready Player One. So we've discussed a little bit about the 2018 film, as well as the 2011 book written by Ernest Cline, that of course was adapted into that blockbuster. The film itself explores the futuristic world where virtual reality simulations take place of many of the physical interactions of the world that takes place within. And one of the reasons we wanted to bring you onto the show is to discuss, some of these parallels to technology that we have now, and really begin to understand if this is something that could happen, and to kind of get into the weeds of what's here and the building blocks.
I'm glad you brought all that up, because with all this journalism talk, I realized I have the wrong notes open, because I have nothing but getting pictures of Spider-Man from my editor for my freelance work over here. So I'm going to go ahead and fix my notes, and we'll, go tech.
Yeah, we Joe's very big on puns and references. He's very good at it. But yeah, so Seamus, looking at some of the building blocks of the universe of Ready Player One and comparing it to what we have now. One of the conversations I had about Ready Player One very early on with my brother and some of my friends about this was analyzing the social MMO. A lot of folks are familiar with MMORPGs, right? But the social MMO can be a little bit different, despite being a large aspect of the MMORPG, right? And this is what constitutes a very large part of what's called, the OASIS, the simulation in the movie, in the book. So what I wanted to ask you about when it came to MMOs, especially this social focused type, from what you've observed in your career, do you see kind of an issue with the adoption rates in MMOs, especially the social ones, when you start to envision like a worldwide presence here?
Yeah, I mean, if we go back to, the likes of Second Life, which was probably one of those first big attempts to, commercialize, in a sense, that idea of it's a free-form space, and you can even, buy and sell land and property within this space. And they were, trying to sort of have that arm's length idea of saying, let's try to pretend there's not even a company behind the scenes that technically runs servers and owns it all. That kind of context, right? I'm already jumping around in my head, because I'm like, look, it got a lot of attention from people looking from the outside and kind of going, oh, what's that thing? But at the same time, it struggled to encourage many people to, necessarily participate. But at exactly the same time, I'm like, it was pretty early in the whole, adoption of tech in and of itself. It was probably pretty early. As in, we were still pretty much having to go into the study and sit down in front of a desktop computer at the time that Second Life was getting a lot of attention. Not many people had that sense of having access everywhere that you go, anytime you want it. So I think, I'm already, I feel like tripping myself over there in that idea of what was it doing wrong? It's like, well, it did a lot of things right, and the community that it built loved what it was doing. I think when you then send that out to a larger scale, though. You definitely had the weird issues of things like people trying to hold a serious, almost academic conference in Second Life, and then somebody sends a fleet of flying dicks into the room that just kind of overwhelms the event, and you're like, how do we deal with that? And you're like, well, you get that added online anonymity aspect that means it's easy for people to go, the online version of me is a bit of an asshole. So, here we go.
So enjoy this cock flock I just sent your way.
Yeah. So, the scaling has definitely been an issue over time. And I guess that idea of how do you set the ground rules for an online world that means it can be, self-policing enough that everybody feels happy and comfortable within the space, and it doesn't devolve into something where an awful lot of people just say, I don't know if I really even want to be part of that.
Yeah. Well, and I see the totally the picture you're painting, because I used these MMOs at one point. Now, I never used Second Life, but I did participate in a game called There, which was created by Machina Technologies, and that had once been used as a platform for the military, actually, to create this worldwide communication 3D platform, right? And so
cool. Yeah.
Isn't that still going?
Oh yeah, it's still going.
That's still around, right?
Yeah. It did pass away briefly though, and then it got revived again. But
right.
But it's built on on a foundation of, like you mentioned, it's a small yet dedicated community of people. It's not scaled to the point where you're going to walk into somebody on the street wearing a There shirt, right? It's just not going to happen. So to me, when I start to look at the parallels between what an OASIS could be and what current technologies are, I see these smaller pockets rather than everybody, whipping out their phone like in every Disney movie you've ever seen that has a worldwide connected app on it. These things just don't seem to translate that well. And as we start to look at the world of esports and how recreation is almost a digital thing as opposed to a physical thing, right? I start to look at what the OASIS could be, but then I start to look at the failures of some things like PlayStation Home that used to be also the social MMO, hosted through the platform. So, I mean, that's where I start to ask the question of what's really failing in these worlds. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I really do think there is an important relationship between who is behind the project and do people find the feeling of putting effort into becoming part of this world worthwhile? And do they feel like they're getting enough back? Because there is an element there of an investment, in a sense, in committing to a space, especially when they're trying to give you some tools that will let you be creative in that space. There's a sense there of going, okay, well, do I, what part of this do I actually own? And it's not even a question of buying and selling so much as, how confident am I that in a year's time, the things that I'm creating here are still going to, be here to exist, and what are the rules of these spaces? And I think that's where things like PlayStation Home, I remember logging in and sort of looking around it and just thinking, like the landmarks, or almost like the invitation to do things was not really there. You kind of go, okay, I'm here. That cliff face of what do I do next was so apparent, that you're kind of like, well, okay, without any prompt to find out what I do next, this is just, that was novel. But in the end, to catch up with my friends, it's easy to use a chat app or, the PlayStation chat than to think I'm going to go into this virtual physical space and try to find them. It was like, this isn't making it a better experience in that sense.
And that's kind of like where I was thinking as you were describing. It's like PlayStation Home felt like it was this weird virtually animated chat room where instead of like actually viewing the chat and being able to just hop into a conversation, you had to walk somewhere and figure something out. And it was like this really odd version of trying to simulate real life and a chat room at the same time, and it just felt like it was clunky and didn't quite work.
Yeah. And yeah, like
Mhm.
my son has actually been playing VR chat recently. And yeah, I know we'll get into VR stuff a bit more later,
Mhm.
but it was funny talking to him about why he kind of found that as an interesting thing to explore. And as much as it is almost that sense of like, well, it's VR chat rooms and you're walking around and you can modify your avatar and all that sort of
Mhm.
stuff, that gameplay was sort of inherent to it as well. And you know, so in that sense, it sounded to me like for him that was an evolution from Roblox and
Mhm.
Minecraft, and going on to like the servers like Hypixel and stuff in Minecraft, right? Where it's like you're going into a social space, and then that social space has these like physical markers in the space of where, oh, let's go and play, Bed Wars. And so their friends will all go and pick which Bed Wars server they're going to go and play a game in. But they are physically walking into that space. And for them, it's like, yeah, this all makes sense to them, mentally. It's not just picking off a list. It's more fun to, meet up on a server and then run off to this place where you're going to go and play a cool game.
Mhm.
And so VR chat, he was saying, had that same thing where there's almost like versions of Among Us within VR chat. So you could play murder mystery party games within this VR space and also meet up in a more open space to just chat. So
Mhm.
I think that's where the infusing it with a sense of play is a huge part, and something that I think PlayStation at Home reminded me a lot of just some of the 90s like CompuServe type 2D rooms that you could visit, right? It's like, oh, it's a high-res 3D room, but it's not really giving us anything more than we'd already had 15 years earlier.
And that's what's so funny about this is that even in Ready Player One, the people who are in this are quote unquote clanning up, right? They're coming together on this massive scaled,
Mhm.
visual or VR driven world, but then they still localize themselves. The birds of a feather, routine, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
and the main character and their friends, they're just a small pocket of them. And so that's why I kind of struggle with the idea of any social MMO truly staying relevant. As you mentioned, when it comes to the scarcity of any digital driven world, there's a point where that server gets shut off, right? Almost every major video game with an online presence that came out,
Mhm.
maybe I don't know, well, not every single one, but a majority of them,
Majority do. Well, I
yeah,
mean, heck, like even PlayStation 2 games had online service. Like it definitely was not like to the extent of what we had with the PlayStation 3, 4, or like 5 now. But yeah, it was simple. Like you could play against other people online, and those servers, what managed somehow to last until like what 3 years ago was when the last PlayStation 2 online thing finally got the axe. But
yeah.
those communities, like again, like even then, like I'm sure it was like a tight group of like 20 people or 5 just really
Yeah.
sticking together to keep the PlayStation 2 online going.
Yeah. But look,
Mhm.
I always feel like, as something scales, right, it always then has its own, ghettos beyond that, like, and not in a
Mhm.
negative sense, ghettos, but everybody kind
Yeah.
of forms up into little groups. And I even, it was something that really struck me the first time I got to visit New York was, you hear about New York being this big city, huge, enormous. And then you get there and you're walking on the ground in the streets and you suddenly realize that it's like, hang on, every block is essentially its own little neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
And, it's like, it doesn't matter that this, we can't imagine the full scale, right? When we're in any space. And so you start to kind of move through a space and then go, oh, right, like this actually neighborhood has its own vibe. And it's got like tiny corner shops here. Like it's not run by mega stores.
Mhm.
Ultimately,
Yeah.
we have local little tiny bodegas and stuff where that's where you go and grab your essentials, and I
Yeah.
was like, oh my God, there's such a sense of community within this city that's supposedly like the biggest, craziest city in the world. Um, I think that is the same in online spaces. You don't want to stand there in the room where there's a million people
Mhm.
and actively see a million avatars around you, because you're like, what do I do? Where do I start?
Yeah.
But that idea that you and a crew of friends, like, you love the idea that the scale is there, but
Yeah.
then how do you go and enjoy yourself in any given moment? Well, you jump into a thing that has a subset of those people, and hopefully they're people that you'll get along with and enjoy hanging out with.
Yeah, and then you can all have the same looking avatar of a 90s video game character. You go looking for your queen, and you become just an absolute amazing viral video for a short period of time.
Yeah, perfect.
Well, Seamus, you bring a really good point up here that I do want to mention New Zealand for a moment, because the Flight of the Conchords TV show, they actually displayed exactly what you just mentioned almost to perfection, because you have the corner store thrift shop that's supplying electronics to the neighborhood. Just beneath them you have the Chinese restaurant / laundromat, and they're feeding the stacks of people there. And I think it is kind of the perfect visual for some of these online communities, because I mean that is what it is. Almost every online community I've been a part of that has a 3D virtual aspect to it does the same thing. You end up meeting 5 or 10 people, and then you're clanned up. So it's I've just never seen the community ever build outside of that. In my own experience, that's been how it is.
Yeah, I think the important thing there, of course, is also then how does the platform help you discover other like-minded people that you want to spend time with? Because again, it's one thing to bring in your real-world friends, but often even convincing your other real-world friends to that this new thing I'm checking out. I know we've all been hanging out on this other thing, but this new thing is cool, and I promise it's going to be cool, and you should all come over too. But part of that first step is then, one of those people has gone in there and had a good time in some way. And that kind of then means, how do you make those initial connections so that if it's genuinely trying to be social, that someone can come in and in some way bump into enough other people who are going to show them a good time, that then that critical mass can kind of keep coming over from their word of mouth to other people.
Yeah. I think what the question for me becomes then is, if we can't scale online communities when freedom and marketplaces and recreational things is the focus of it, in the world of Ready Player One, education actually ends up being one of the bigger aspects of why it's adopted so much, right? Because you've got schools within the OASIS and people attend them just like they would in a physical location. And when I look at the other side of this coin here, I look at education throughout COVID and how technology adoption accelerated so quickly over the last year and a half, whether it's some of the virtual technologies, all of the different conferencing technologies that we now almost use every single day. So looking at education as a way to move this forward, as it did in the OASIS, I mean, I don't know if it could work that way in our world. You've got funding issues in certain places. There's employment scarcity too. Finding good teachers, good people who could even run these types of rooms. Joe is a teacher himself. He's shaking his head hard over there. So I mean, education as a vessel for this, I mean, do you think that, and we'll save VR for just a moment, but I mean, do you think education could be the platform for maybe getting us closer to an OASIS?
I think I think it's probably not, purely because in a lot of respects, education is always this thing that we're kind of temporarily moving through. And so it ends up being like, it's more of a, I think, like thinking about Clubhouse at the end of last year, early this year, right? The big question around Clubhouse was, is it a platform or is it a tool? And ultimately it was or is it a feature? And it's like, it was easy for other platforms to start adding in a feature that was enough like Clubhouse that people didn't have to go to Clubhouse. And of course, they already had their built-in, group of people that that they could then start doing that kind of a audio chat experience with, instead of needing to build a whole new social graph over on Clubhouse if they didn't know who was already there. I think in education, we've kind of got enough of a division in where you can get an education service from like the major players that are out there right now, that I don't see that moment where there is a critical mass for any one of those or a new service to come along and kind of blow away. As you say, the adoption that is required, especially from the powers that be, to say, yeah, this is the new education platform, everybody. Now, every school needs to change what they've already been doing and adopt this new platform. All that kind of side of it is tricky when, Google does a good job with Classroom. Microsoft does a good job with sort of the Microsoft 365 tools for school environments. You've got like Khan Academy for self-directed online learning. I think, if any of those things could be the thing, I think it would be more of that self-directed online learning kind of idea, like the Khan Academies of the world, where, it is about easy access to educational opportunities, whether or not you have, a formal space that you're attached to. If they were then able to start creating social spaces attached to kind of certain classes and things, then maybe that's how they start to get some gravity around that idea of, and you're also going to take this course with other people. You can take it anytime you like. Or you could also say, I'm going to start taking this course in September, and a whole bunch of other people are also going to start taking it in September, and we're going to have people to bounce off as part of taking the course. So maybe there's a little bit of that, but certainly when it comes to needing the infrastructure of actual teachers and actual school environments to participate, again, I've seen locally, that effort to get online learning up and running properly during the COVID lockdowns, and like the stresses on the teachers. I think for them, the idea of anybody coming along and saying, there's a new tool we want you to learn, they're like, la, 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 do not make me touch. So I've just got this one working and you want me to go to something else?
No, from my experience in the industry, there are a lot of teachers that are like that. Like the amount of teachers here and our part of the world that still want to cling to worksheets they've been using for the past 20 years instead of trying something new or doing something different. Like, it's there. I completely agree, because I think if we see this work in the educational field, it's going to be something private before anything is very on a large scale. I know we've got ABC Mouse and a few other online academies, and if anything would have a successful OASIS presence for education, where you have some sort of avatar or VR experience learning, it's gonna have to come from wealthy providers. Otherwise, I just don't see it working.
Yeah, I feel like there's an important thing there, that often the writing of these books and it's a novel, they can comfortably overlook that idea of of how did this particular thing push aside all other things to become that that universal truth in in platforms. And I think back to when the the iPhone first launched and smartphones started to become everywhere, that there was that phase where there was this huge resistance from, particularly within businesses, where BlackBerry was the that had been the go-to platform for a long time. It was definitely great for typing emails and things, but then there were businesses that would be like, it's about security and it's about this and it's about that. But I remember so many conversations with executives at companies who were like, once the executive was like, screw this, I want to be using an iPhone. This is nice to use and it gives me a better quality of life. So then they're the ones now telling IT, how do we are making iPhones work in this business. Let's do it. But there was so much resistance to that smartphone shift, because it was there's certain platforms and we've already decided that this is the right way to do it. And here's the reasons why, that we kind of, the idea that there's any one thing that could generate that sort of gravitational force again that would mean everything gets pushed aside. And even then, ultimately smartphones aren't just iPhones. They are, lots of different pieces of hardware with different operating systems. Well, two really now.
Yeah. Aptly named after a food of some kind as well.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it just whenever I think about these sorts of things, it's like it's if I was writing the novel, I'd totally skip over that bit because that is the boring bit of like, how did this thing win? And that is the biggest challenge for any of this stuff is, I mean, right, Facebook is kind of in one way the winner of what is a social network. There's still lots of other players, and and Facebook itself has started to talk about the metaverse as an idea. I think in some ways they're using it as a word less than the true sort of full concept, but there's still plenty of people who are like, yeah, but like, do I trust that company to be the company? And I think that's something in the book that they did do a bit of, which is, that idea that, well, Halliday as the person was incredibly egalitarian and set it up so that it wouldn't become, controlled by somebody. And then that's its own tension within the novel. But, I think there's such a big part of that is, do you even trust the platform enough to know that, I'm ready to let everybody agree that this should be the one true platform?
Well, so we've kind of straddled the line about infrastructure a couple times here, though. And I know you mentioned it originally as not infrastructure in the sense of actual net, of phone lines and the ability to, push data. But when I start to look at that aspect of this universe, because something that doesn't get addressed in this book is how this massive network can be, created. In the United States, there are major cities that are getting fiber investment, and some cities won't see it for maybe 50 more years. And so it's usually a question of funding, whether that is politically driven. But in the case of Australia, I mean, you mentioned this too, it's not just here. The National Broadband Network, in the past year, you mentioned how this should be a landmark technology that we're all talking about, but we're not.
Yeah,
I mean,
but yeah.
These issues persist everywhere. So I guess what's your take from the localized aspect of where you are?
Yeah, the National Broadband Network was, I think first proposed back in around 2008, 2009. And it was that idea of the major upgrade to all the infrastructure in the country. Australia, through until the late 90s, had one, we had a national provider for all communication. So it was, owned by the government. It was called Telecom, then became known as Telstra. And the government in the late 90s decided, let's sell it off and start to, privatize it. And I remember at the time, actually, as a big late 90s nerd, kind of going, networks are about to become everything. This is the worst time to sell our perfect piece of, single infrastructure that the government could just say, great, now let's upgrade everything, and without needing to argue with a company about how to do it. Sure enough, that's exactly what happened when they proposed the NBN. And at that point, Telstra was largely privatized. The government was still technically the majority shareholder, but it was still, an arm's length thing. That Telstra actually didn't put in the best bid for this, tender for who will upgrade the country's broadband infrastructure. And the people who were running Telstra at the time were notorious for the fact that they were kind of like, screw you, government. Like, what are you going to do? And so, the government went, oh, well, actually, we're going to build a new company, and they went, let's ignore Telstra then if they're going to be assholes about it. And we're going to build a new one called NBN, and it's going to basically roll out all new cables everywhere based on fiber instead. And, we'll just ignore the copper. Then they started to discover things like, right, how hard that is when it's like, oh, you know what we need? Actually, we need the pits, the holes in the ground where all the cables currently run are owned by Telstra, and we're now going to have to license the holes in the ground. And suddenly that's that big thing, right? Like you say, rolling out this infrastructure, you're like, literally the expensive part is the labor of putting cables in the ground. That same thing where people so often forget that it's like, how do we have amazing communication around the world? Because there are giant cables in the sea. It's not magical wireless everywhere. There are giant cables running under the ocean from Australia to America, from Australia to Singapore, like all these kind of cables.
But for a while, to my understanding, we came under the attack of sharks. Like that was the thing,
right? Like
there's all kinds of cables.
Yeah, that's like crazy stuff, and it's so wild, but that's it. You got to put this stuff in the ground. I think, Elon Musk is obviously probably leading the charge on the whole Starlink project, where it is kind of going, what if we just do really good satellites, but if we do like hundreds of them and try to just have them kind of pointing anywhere someone might need one. I know there's a small region in Australia that now has access to the Starlink satellite system, and it is better than the available wired infrastructure because it is kind of country areas in southern New South Wales and Victoria. So there's certainly that potential is someone crazy enough to be Elon Musk throwing satellites around might manage to go, well, we can now ignore the wider infrastructure because we've just spent all that money putting it in space instead. But even then, you're like, cables, it's hard to beat cables for reliability, right? And that's where the NBN was such a good idea, but it did ultimately get, governments changed, the politics changed. The current government believes less in the idea of spending a whole bunch of money in order to give do it once. That was one of the, there was one politician who had a bit of a weighing, like a way up vote in one particular election. And he put it so simply. He said, actually, the reason he was sticking with one particular government was, he said, the NBN, he felt, he was from a regional area. He said, this is going to be one of the greatest projects for people in regional Australia. And he said, everybody I talked to all the experts I've talked to have said, do it once, do it right, do it with fiber. And that's how you fix the future of communication, and governments then changed and they took a lot of the fiber out of the mix. And now it is just a giant mixed bag, and it depends on where you live, like it always used to. Where do you live? That's going to make all the difference. And that's kind of annoying, but that's the really hard part when it comes to equity of access.
And that's the barrier that we have here as well, because we have both local and strong national presence from a utility supply standpoint, because AT&T has a very big influence here. But then we have these smaller regional companies that have provided service to, like you mentioned, some of these low-lying regional areas, right? So in the cases where they're not being fought over, though, it is a constant struggle with converting copper to PON, right? So that's the constant labor issue. That's once again, we're talking about scarcity here, right? That's the scarcity in being able to adopt that type of technology where we are. But shifting gears, though, back to VR, like you mentioned, VR to me seemed like probably the most likely thing to happen, I think, in relation to a Ready Player One, because we've already seen how VR in the pandemic can help, keep families closer together. But like you mentioned too, it's providing entertainment. It's allowing people to get education in maybe dangerous situations. So VR as a technology, I guess the real idea I have is not if, when. And if not 2050, when do you think VR should be, largely adopted?
And will it be as dangerous as the Virtual Boy once was?
Oh, yes. Red colors.
Burn my eyes with your weird red colors. Yeah. I'm a fan. I've got it set up in my living room. I've got like the light boxes actually attached to the walls, and I don't use it as much as I should. So I mean, maybe that's its own thing, right? But it always, I think the big breakthrough is definitely, it's definitely going to be, when does somebody get the headset simplified to the point where you can just kind of throw it on and you don't need to set up your rig for a session, you know? And I know, like, talking to folks from HTC, I did a meeting session with them once where they were showing me this new meeting tech that they were using. It was very early in the pandemic, and you know, they were kind of already using this tool internally, and they were making it available more widely. But what fascinated me was, I think in my head, there's one picture you have of, you know, what's that going to be like to have this meeting in VR? What would be different about that to being in Zoom, or, you know, any kind of a meeting we're already having on a screen? And it was so fundamentally different. It felt really nice to be able to have a meeting with these people. They were like, you could sit at a table, you know, you use your pointer to just kind of zap yourself to, I want to be in that seat, or I want to be over there. But the really big thing that kind of shifted was there was such a clarity about where you were looking. And even just by like holding the controllers, I was having a conversation with the guy from HTC, and I was gesticulating a bit, and then I realized, like, oh yeah, my avatar's hands are moving because my hands are moving, and my eye line is going to exactly where I'm looking in the world. And it meant, you know, if he was speaking to me, I was looking at him. And in a way that, right, we can have this conversation right now, and then I might kind of look over here to look something up while we're talking about it to make sure I'm, you know, going to get a reference right or something. But in VR, it's like you can so tell that I've distracted myself and I'm now not even looking at you while you're looking at me, talking to me, you know, or they're now having a side conversation because I can see the two of them talking to each other, and the audio can have proximity attached to it so that they're quieter because I'm not as close to them right now as I am to another person. Like, so many of these spatial elements start to become, there's such a real sense of presence attached to that it really felt different. But the trick right now is just so few people have easy access to it, right? You have to go to a special venue to have a great 40-minute session of VR. And after 40 minutes, you feel tired and you're ready for a break, and you don't want to spend all day in VR like that. So I think, you know, there's all the talk of, you know, of Apple and, you know, obviously Oculus has kind of kept iterating on headsets you can easily just pop on. The guy I met with from HTC actually said that while I was in my living room, in my little, you know, setup, and it did mean I needed to, you know, take the laptop in there, plug in the headset, launch it, make sure Steam was happy, and then, you know, get everything up and running. He had a new, you know, wireless headset unit. And so for him, the meeting calendar reminder went off, and then he just reached over and popped that headset on at his desk. And so that barrier was so much lower for him to just literally go, oh, I've got a scheduled meeting and it's starting in 1 minute. Okay, well, I'll wait another 30 seconds before I put the headset on. You know, I'll jump straight in as soon as I put on that headset. So once we start getting those, you know, affordable headsets that pretty much are going to be smartphone powered, right? I think that's going to be the thing, is just then it is that anywhere you want to go, stick the thing on. You know, in that sense, it's like it's probably going to be augmented reality that first convinces everybody that there's real value, and then almost will then perhaps go backwards from AR to VR, as, you know, as an AR headset is able to then black out everything else rather than just overlay stuff. In my head, that's the trajectory, and I keep thinking it's just a few more years away, but it's been just a few more years away for a lot of years now.
Well, I mean, I think I've consulted roughly 4 or 5 different articles on this, and this is in the past few months, where you have tech leaders that are all saying, well, I think it's only 10 years away. And I go, all right, so I keep thinking about, Back to the Future Part 2 and what 2015 is supposed to look like. And I go,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
that was the 10 years ago of 95. That was the
Yep.
10 years ago of 86. So it's
Yeah.
like,
Well, yeah, like I mean, any cartoon in the '80s, what they thought the year 2000 would look like, really.
Yeah.
I was going to say, we're supposed to be in Mad Max right now. We should
We
all be
should
leather
be.
clad and have,
Mhm.
masks over our faces. I mean,
Shiny
Seamus,
and
I don't know.
chrome.
Well, we've kind of towed the line on this a couple times today. I want to kind of go around and ask everybody about the viability of this OASIS future. You've alluded to it a little bit about the future of it, but based on the infrastructure limitations that we have, the hardware limitations that we have, right? I mean, it's not like we have the military investing in this nearly as much as maybe they did, cell technologies or broadband technologies years ago. Really, what do we think the chances are of this happening and the years in which it would most likely occur?
Do you want me to go first, or are you going to go?
Well, I mean, you're definitely the professional on this compared to me. Like, I will make up an answer. But
Look, I feel like, of all the people out there that I think could make this thing real, I think Tim Sweeney at Epic is the one that has the greatest potential to pull it off, because the fact that he's fighting some big fights against both Google and Apple for sort of freedom of payment systems on their app platforms. Obviously, it's self-serving in certain regards, but he kind of is picking these fights in a way that I think speaks to his own belief in the idea that there should be a freedom of access on all the different platforms. I don't necessarily agree with the full way his argument works, but I think he kind of definitely seems like he's trying to fight the good fight there. And when we look at Fortnite, I think Fortnite, is his Trojan horse almost for, trying to build out a genuine virtual space where people can hang out and do anything they like. As much as the Battle Royale is the thing that blew up for Fortnite and made it all of the billions of dollars, the creative mode is, I think, where they keep sort of putting more and more effort into its evolution. And while we've got tools like Roblox out there, and of course, the Minecrafts of the world, later this year, I think it is, when there is like a major update coming to Fortnite where it's moving to the Unreal 5 engine, which is the next generation Unreal Engine.
Yep.
And there's also a whole bunch of new creative tools, essentially programming languages, that are going to be released that will work within Fortnite, so that it will almost become like the actual polished high resolution version of Roblox in a lot of regards there, because people will be able to make something and then put that up as a thing that they've made and invite people into those spaces. I'm sure at some point they'll add some kind of commerce system to a lot of that side of it. But there's a lot of those things when I think applying a VR helmet to any 3D world is easy in that sense. The hard bit is making a compelling 3D world people want to spend time in. And I think that's something that Fortnite has done. And the way in which, in that classic Oasis sense of all of the brands have become happy to hang out in Fortnite in a way that means, you do have avatars that are based on cool 90s characters or whatever your favorite, superhero from. But like, who would have thought that one game would get both DC and Marvel to let their characters coexist in a virtual space? I often wonder, at what point did they just kind of pat each other on the back and go, yeah, we're cool. Yeah, Disney and DC and every other property known to man has just gone, yeah, why not have a skin in this game? That seems cool. So that's the bit that blows me away, is everyone's kind of agreed to let this be a shared space. Yeah, you have to earn your skins in some regards, which again, in that Oasis sense, right? Like there are certain skins you can only get if you grind it out for a season and get to the final stages of a season, and you've got the cool skin now that not many people can ever have because you got it. This season is Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty, and I'm like, God damn it, I wish I played that game enough that I could unlock Rick Sanchez, because he's even been done in like cell shaded style. And you're like, that's kind of awesome that the 3D world can be designed so you can have a cell shaded character sharing the space, like all that kind of stuff. You're like, there's a technical polish there that so many other things don't have. And the idea that at some point they can just flick a switch and pretty much go, yeah, like now it's a 3D space and it works with VR. That bit is so much easier than all the other stuff they've already managed to pull off. So I don't see any other humans out there, that are kind of sitting in that space where I think, like I don't almost in that Halliday sense, like Tim Sweeney is the guy that I could imagine one day, deciding to tick some box and go, oh, this now lives in a trust. Like it's technically owned by us, but it sits in a trust. We can't change it. We can't, like this now is kind of owned by everybody in a certain regard, in the name of, trying to make people comfortable that this is this, shared universe that he definitely has often spoken of wanting to see exist in the world.
Yeah. And Joe, just for the sake of me usually having the last word, I'm going to hop in before you here because
that's fine.
Seamus, what I think is a good analogy for this technology adoption and where it's headed is very similar to how time works with regards to like black holes and how time is perceived differently the closer you are to certain objects that have that pull. So with regards to, let's use Japan as an example. Japan decided, post World War II, that we're going to focus on technology. We want to be the hub of the world for it. And so it's not that, like from a social evolution standpoint, that anyone's behind somebody else, country to country. But when we look to Japan, I mean, there's a man who just married a hologram last year. I mean, they have dating apps where people are having relationships with fully AI driven persons. And so for us here in the United States, looking to Japan and going, I can't possibly understand that jump yet because I don't live in it. I'm not next to it all the time, but that's happening on this world right now. Things that are a present mind in a world like Blade Runner are happening in Japan right now.
Yeah. And like Japan has a beautiful thing there where they, I think it's out of the kind of spiritual basis of their culture where everything can be imbued with spirit. And I think in some ways it's kind of meant they have this much more positive relationship with the way sort of, tech has evolved because, right, it's part of why they can write some of the scariest horror movies known to man because, right, like Ring, it's like, well, yeah, because a videotape can have an evil spirit in it and it will kill you if you play it. And on that flip side, they have that sense that, that technology itself can have a certain spirit and we can have a connection with it. Whereas, in Western cultures, we've often had the whole and the tech is going to murder us, right? Like that's just how it works. So somehow they've had this more positive attitude towards how we and technology can, almost, become partners that is quite, different to us Western folk thinking, it's gonna kill us, right? Like if we keep pushing them with brooms, they're gonna remember that, and then they're gonna murder us for it.
Well, and that's where I wanted to use that black hole analogy because that's where I think I stand right now. Is that I think part of the barrier to doing an OASIS style, environment is that we're not all on the same trajectory, and so that's where I think the real conversation is going to be for most of us. Now, as far as the actual dates go for this, I mean, as well as I do that 10 years in Japan works differently than 10 years in central Wisconsin. So there's going to be noticeable differences there. So really, I think if anybody is going to be able to answer the question, I would say it would be the Japanese right now. I mean, they're probably going to be able to tell us based on what they've chosen to focus on as a country, and unfortunately I haven't read many editorials from them on this. I probably should, but but I don't know. I think that just based on the estimates that I've seen, people are saying anywhere from 10 to 25 years we could be seeing maybe not worldwide adoption, but it's not that far away. So yeah, that's my take on it. Joe, what have you got?
I don't know. I don't think going straight to something like the OASIS is going to happen in a really relative future. I just think like in the case of at least like education, or even like I think Mark, we've talked about this, like when there's that big solar road like idea and craze that happened, was brought up in the United States like years ago. It's like, what's the feasibility of this? Like you said, like when you're looking at like the education system, it's gonna be like, all right, so that's gonna be like per school district, and they're gonna look like, all right, well, what's the cost of us doing this? What's the likelihood of this working? And you have to prove that this is a more feasible system than just busing the kids to a school, putting them in a building where they're going to work one-on-one with a teacher. Where I think if you're going to see something much more like 2009 Star Trek with how the Vulcan children are educated, where it's literally like a little pod with a circle around them with a screen, and they're just getting blasted with like questions and stuff to them, and the teacher's just kind of walking around them to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, because that'll be something that makes more feasible sense than something like the OASIS, which I think in its best possible working form is going to be entertainment, where this is going to be something put on by a large company where it makes sense. This is a place where you go to have fun, and people will pay a subscription price to be a part of it, to keep it going. It's gonna be something like World of Warcraft, right? It's gonna be something that has to be so well done that you are the few or one of like the only companies that's still able to charge a subscription price for your service, where all these other games are doing the same thing, but like they have to be free to even keep players coming in anymore. And when that happens, you do not have the same quality of game. Like, as much as like I loved playing Star Trek Online for a while, you look at Star Trek Online now versus World of Warcraft, there is a clear superior like content between the two of them. So, I mean, as far as like something OASIS happening, where it's like literally interwoven into like every aspect of life, like if that happens, like I don't see it happening by 2050. Like this would have to be something it's pretty far out there. You could like, and again, it's for the same reason like you said, like rural areas, like when even think of like alternating current, like electricity was coming around. You had farms for like, I don't know, decades after like you had electricity being a staple in large cities before those communities even got something better than a candle. So I just see something this advanced and this difficult to maintain. Like, if it happens to the point where it's like in every part of our lives, it's going to be pretty far out there. We'll be stacking our RVs in Ohio pretty sky high before we get to the OASIS.
I mean, I do love the kind of the whole project of trying to predict these things, because over the years we kind of just keep seeing how wrong we get this stuff. Like I always love thinking back to you mentioned Star Trek, and Gene Roddenberry kind of came up with transporters and all these, and like warp drives and things. And in the original series Star Trek, they walked information backwards and forwards between terminals with disks. Because as big as he could think in those other way, and like the transporter, right? It was apparently just devised because it was an easy way to get between the set up there and down there without needing to build props of ships and things that could fly up and down. You're like, clever, clever sci-fi work there. But yeah, like they were walking boxes of disks backwards and forwards and plugging them into terminals, because the idea of a networked information system was not even close.
No.
And, so there's just so much of that stuff where you think, I mean, I remember the Segway, right, as well, when that was first launched. And at the time it was launched, Dean Kamen and all these breakfast shows are talking about how it's the future of transport. And it was like, I do remember that day in an office having someone say, "Oh my God, this thing's amazing." And I just remember saying, what are they going to do to modify every road to make it perfect for segways versus cars? Like the amount of changes that would need to happen out there on the actual real world means this thing it's not really fit for the sidewalk. I'll use the American term there. And it's called a footpath here, by the way. That's just, that's the difference. It's not fit for sharing, the sidewalk with humans, and it's not really good enough to share the road. And so you have to make its own space. And of course, it ended up being a hobbyist device and not changing the world. But then the things, again, that come by stealth, like having ubiquitous wireless internet in our pocket with all the world's information accessible at any time, somehow we couldn't think of that until it was here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's for the same reasons that in 1989, an Android with the ability to, process at 60 teraflops was a big deal, right? And now, and this is even as recent as 2016, we have computers that are 500 times faster than Commander Data, right? Based on their estimates for what fast was. So I mean, I think it's possible with more time that and as necessities pop up. Now we're not going to have a global pandemic every single year, but I mean, who knows? We're
and that has been an accelerant for some of this stuff. That people's comfort with being forced to sit in front of a screen, and that it can be at least somewhat fulfilling socially, and that it can, and particularly so many businesses that, leaders have had that mindset that it's like, if you're not at your desk, you're not really working. And it's like, I know plenty of people who've sat at desks and they weren't working, and someone else who would work from home and work their ass off because they wanted to prove that they could do it and that they could be a contributing member of their team. We've kind of gotten over some of those social hurdles that I do think, some of these will accelerate because there's a certain level of cultural comfort now with people knowing that this is viable to be at a distance, but still be socially and, and in a business sense kind of, working together.
Which is I think it's a perfect way to conclude, because I mean, you're in Australia, we're in Wisconsin in the US. And I mean, this is a conversation that, wouldn't have been possible years ago. So, I mean, just really awesome to get to spend this time with you, Seamus, and kind of pick your brain on this. And we also like to end our shows by giving our guests the floor to talk about where we can find you, as well as, what you've got going on.
Yeah, cool. So easiest place to find me usually is on Twitter. I'm at Seamus, Seamus. And I've slowed down on Twitter a little bit lately. I was trying to literally give my brain a rest from just the fire hose of doom scrolling that is the world right now. But you'll always find me there. I definitely keep going back. Where most of my work now appears is at Byteside. So you can go to byteside.com. We also have a newsletter there where I do little weekly brain dumps of kind of columning and opining on the state of technology, and also just try to share cool links. So, I think in the newsletter, we, instead of just sharing our own stories, I do a bit of curation of here's cool stuff that I've spotted during the week from other outlets. Like there was an awesome story this week about I think it was on Vice, where somebody has made 9 AI-generated faces that are almost like master keys that can be used to pretend to be almost anyone else through AI recognition systems. And you're like, oh my God, you can kind of understand what they mean by a master key, in a sense, that it's like, oh, one of these 9 should fit almost any AI recognition system. And so stuff like that, where I'm just like thought-provoking cool links of the week in the newsletter. Because I know people hate having to go to our website regularly to find out what's been going on. So that can turn up in your inbox once a week if you grab that. And Byteside itself is at Byteside on Twitter too.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely hope we can drive some people there for you, because I love the site.
Oh, yeah, and the Byteside podcast. By the way,
Yeah.
if you're listening to this in an app, right, you can just type Byteside in and you'll find it. I'm like, oh yeah, that bit.
That's awesome. Well, Seamus, once again, thank you so much for helping us bring this conversation to our viewers. We've absolutely enjoyed getting to talk with you about this. And yeah, we look forward to seeing where you go next with Byteside and your projects there.
Cheers. No, it's been really great fun chatting about this. And yes, theorizing. Let's roll this back in 10 years and see how wrong we all were.
I think that's the fun part of all of this.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'll stop recording. Well, Joe, that was an absolutely kick-ass time with Seamus Byrne. Seamus is just such a wealth of knowledge. I mean, I wasn't it's not like I was surprised that an award-winning tech journalist knows his shit about technology. But holy crap, was getting to talk with him absolutely a treat. And especially because, we tried to predict the future ourselves. But I think coming from someone who is in the industry and actually talk to us about the future of where things could go, totally awesome as it relates to an OASIS, Ready Player One, and kind of picking that future out.
Oh, completely. This was such a fun time. I'm glad we got to talk to him and that we've made a new connection in the digital realm. Which, speaking of connections in the digital realms, I think what we should do is give some shout outs to our friends who have helped us along the way and who are just, out doing their own thing now. So someone who I'd like to give a quick shout out to is the Podcast Father, who just released his September episode, which covers some really, really great independent creators.
Yeah, he's got his whole episode list that's out. So his shows are going to be booked, and you can find all of that here through his Twitter. And yeah, I think that it's really fun to give shout outs across the Twitterverse, as we did last week. Yeah, continuing in that tradition, one of our earliest friends on Twitter is Pixie from the Next on Stage 1 podcast. And really want to give her a couple shout outs here, because we've collaborated a lot on what's called Twitter Spaces, where the community kind of comes together. It's like a nice audio chat room for people to share their thoughts and do things like that. And Pixie has really kind of spearheaded building that community out and sharing helpful things with other creators who are just up and coming. On the topic of Next on Stage 1, though, it is an adult-oriented podcast coming from folks who have actually worked in the stripping industry, the adult entertainment industry. So it's a not safe for work podcast, but I think you're going to enjoy what they have there. Some very interesting stories from the field. But Next on Stage 1 is actually wrapping up its current season. They just celebrated their 50th episode. So go ahead and check it out. They've got stories about strippers and some fun but terrible things that have happened along the way. So definitely give them a shout out.
And if you're ready to revisit something that you may have watched a while ago and hear about some people who are also rewatching something they watched a while ago, how about our friends at Sudden But Inevitable, who we had way back when we did our Firefly week. They're now currently rewatching Cowboy Bebop, one of the most prolific anime series ever made. And honestly, this is a go-to anime that I recommend to my friends who don't even like it, and they usually like Cowboy Bebop. So if it is something you've watched before and really enjoyed, check out our friends at Sudden But Inevitable as they rewatch Cowboy Bebop.
Yeah, our friend Jesse, as well as Ricky D, who joined us for our breakdown, they're doing that every week. They're doing a live cast as well, so you can jump on in and look at their analysis as they break that down. But similar to last week, we are not going to give you a preview because we'd rather let you see that unfold throughout our social media, so stay tuned. Got some very big guests coming up, so we can't wait to share it with you, but we don't want to blow the lid on that. We want this to be special, unique, and hope you guys enjoy it. But until next time, keep on dissecting.